Welcome. You're listening to The Aligned Self, Conversations in Creating a Conscious and Abundant Life. This is Daniel Denovi. I'll be your guide and host. Let's see just where we can take this. Hello, friend, and welcome back to the conversation. This is part 2 of my series on the multiverse, parallel universes, parallel timelines, probable selves, and probable realities. In part 1, I did a very basic explanation of quantum physics and the principles that support the whole idea of the multiverse. Now, you don't need to listen to that, but I suggest you do, especially if you're someone like me that likes to know the nuts and bolts of things, how things work, or at least have a theoretical explanation of why it's possible. In this episode, I'm going to address more of the esoteric concepts around the multiple realities, the parallel timelines, the probable selves. Now, I've always known this as the probable self, or probable realities. And later I'm going to recount a personal event, a personal scripting where I shifted the timeline. And from my perspective, I cheated death, or I avoided something very serious. When I did that, I was not aware of the concept of the multiverse, or the quantum physics explanation of why this worked for me. So before I go too far astray, let's arrive at a definition of what we're talking about. What is the multiverse? Essentially, our experience of reality is one of many probable realities available to us. Every time we make a choice or come to a fork in the road, there is a branch that is splintered off our path, and whatever probability that we did not take is played out in another storyline and another timeline. So over time, just from our own personal perspective, there's an exponential number of timelines that are occurring that are playing out every alternative possibility that we did not choose. And even when we do choose one, it plays that out until we make a choice to go a different route, to take a different approach. If you'd like a Hollywood perspective on this, check out Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. That's from the superhero franchise of Marvel. In the previous episode, though, I talked about a timeline as being somewhat of a misnomer. It's probably more appropriately referred to as a storyline. By and large, time is a mental construct. It's an agreed-upon measurement. And actually, we're keeping track of events. Even when we watch the clock, we're keeping time or keeping track of the number of seconds, the number of minutes, the number of hours. But experiments in quantum physics and entanglement of particles says that when a particle is entangled with another particle, a subatomic particle, that a change in one particle will precipitate an identical change in the other particle instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. What this inferred is our concept of time and how time works was completely wrong, or could be completely wrong. And so what we have is a mental construct that we kind of agree upon, and that's how we keep track of time. And also, the idea of a timeline suggests that there is an actual physical universe, which there could be on a different plane of existence or another channel. But that becomes more difficult to wrap our head around. But if you think about the different storylines as existing as a vibrational state of possibility and probability, this ties into the quantum physics idea of superposition, which is the idea that all subatomic particles are in superposition or in flux. They're waiting to be observed or take part in an intention. The physics explanation is that these particles exist in a flux and are in a state of dynamic tension, so to speak, until they're called into being by an observer. So every possible potential outcome is occurring at the same time. And the one that you experience is the one that you focus on. Essentially, it's the one you choose. So let's play a little thought experiment. Let's say that you're on a current timeline and you don't like the timeline you're on. In fact, it's somewhat disappointing. And you're entertaining the idea of jumping, making a quantum jump to a new timeline, a different timeline, one that's more, a lot more fun, a lot more beneficial, a lot more money, a lot more love. How easy is it to jump a timeline, enter into a new story? We'll get back around to that, but until we do, let's talk about why are you choosing the timeline that you're choosing? How do we filter out from all the infinite possibilities? How do we filter out the others and arrive and focus on this timeline? Well, we filter out all the possibilities based on our beliefs and our perceptions. Essentially, the universe has an algorithm which says, given this belief or this set of core beliefs and these perceptions, then there's only a limited number of possibilities that you can experience. And while I talked about beliefs and perceptions, I didn't yet include your vibration. You see, every story, every potential outcome has a sympathetic vibration or frequency. And for you to experience a said reality, you need to be in alignment vibrationally with that reality. And certainly your beliefs and your perceptions assist with that vibrational match. The other idea I want to introduce here is you are a spiritual being immersed in the human experience. You came here to have a specific experience, a specific set of lessons, a specific set of decisions you get to make. As I said in the first episode, in part 1, I said a lot of my perspective has been informed through meditation, deep meditations. I've been meditating since I was 13. That's been 50 years ago. And I've had some mystical, holy cow experiences and perceptions, and many times I receive a download of information. I just know things without really knowing how I know them. And so from my perspective, we do make these decisions before incarnating. We essentially are in a community of souls, and there's a collective agreement that we're going to be involved in similar experiences, similar lessons, that we'll be rubbing shoulders inside the experience as we go through this life. We've also chosen to participate in a group mind or a social mind. So for the sake of our discussion, let's just say that we're talking about the timeline or the storyline that you're currently experiencing, with the option of tapping into another probable possibility. Now for a moment, let's go back to the idea that we are a spiritual being immersed in the human experience. So we're here to experience a story, an unfolding of a story. And if you look at our mind, if you look at how the human organism is organized, we live a story. We think in stories. Stories are very important. Something happens and we have to complete the story. How does that apply to me? What does that mean about me? Why did it happen to me? You see, we have to answer these questions in order to complete the story. And if we can't complete the story for one reason or another, we tend to revisit that idea again and again. And we wonder, what did that mean? Why did that happen? Very seldom can we as a human being say, it happened. I don't need to know why. But with that said, sometimes you cannot complete on something. You can't find the answer. You don't know why it happened. But if you can arrive at a point where you can be, satisfied in not being able to have a question like, I'll never know. And I'll just be complete, being incomplete about that story. Now, for a moment, let's talk about instant manifestations. And in a previous episode, just 2 or 3 ago, I talked about why we do not want instantaneous manifestations, because it would rob us of our story. And we're here to have that story. We need to have the moment between what we didn't have and then what we did create in order to appease that sense of story. Because if we didn't have the gap, there was no separation, we would essentially have the experience of nothing. We wouldn't remember. From the moment we had the desire and we had an instantaneous manifestation, that desire was fulfilled, we wouldn't actually remember having the desire to begin with. And now I think would be a good time to revisit my explanation of how the universe was created and why it was created, why you were created, why are the multiple timelines, what's the rationale? If you were God, Goddess, all that is, and nothing else existed, you are just pure consciousness. You are essentially in the state of pure potentiality. On one day, one moment, arose a question. Who am I? What am I? And in uttering that question, in framing that question, there was an almost instantaneous creation of the universe, of the galaxies, the splitting of consciousness into individuated experiences. And thus was born contrast, because you cannot know yourself without knowing that which you are not. And so from that perspective, God, Goddess, all it is living and learning about itself through you. You are an aspect of God. And we've had conversations about the higher self, and that is the aspect of divinity that has one foot in divinity and one foot in your life, totally focused on your experience. You could think of your higher self as an aspect of God, and then our higher self has a God, has a higher power, and then that God has a higher power, a higher level of consciousness, and so on and so on. We don't necessarily know the limits of consciousness or the frame. It tasks our mind in order to put it in a way that we can understand it. If you have a concept of God, frankly, I think your concept or your idea of God is way, way too small. But let's say that you're uncomfortable with the idea of God. You can call it the universal consciousness, superconsciousness, the universal mind. Frankly, I don't care what you call it. I just typically refer to it as God, Goddess, all that is, to kind of catch in all the different potential definitions. But if you were an omnipresent consciousness, you would split up the possibilities. You wouldn't just be satisfied with one soul's progress, one soul's story. No, you would play it out to the nth degree. So for every story that you take on, there is an alternative story, an alternative timeline, an alternative universe, a parallel experience. And the moment you make a choice, the algorithm basically can lay out your path. Well, that choice is going to lead you to this situation, and that situation is going to lead you to this situation. And it can lay out a story based on your core beliefs or your core perceptions. This brings us back to the idea of the timeline, the storyline that you're currently on and that you're experiencing. Who you currently know yourself to be, your core beliefs, you basically have adopted based on the situation and the circumstances that you were born into, that you agreed to step into. So for better or worse, what you currently experience is a haphazard construction. It's kind of pieced together over time based on varying beliefs, different inputs, different parental figures, peer groups, teachers, authorities. You've acquiesced or you've given up your sovereignty, your authority, for the most part, for your life. And you've adopted other people's perceptions and perspectives on who you are. And because we don't typically choose our beliefs, it takes a higher level of awareness to begin choosing your beliefs, choosing the reality that you want to live in, actually deciding who do you want to be, not who are you. And that's where psychology really gets it wrong, I think. Rather than creating who you could be, it takes some assessment based on your experiences and your decisions. Who are you? And that's basically the past. That's where you are right now. But that self-concept, that idea of who you are, gives rise to your story, gives rise to your current timeline. And if you want to shift to a whole new timeline, a whole new story, you need to shift your core beliefs. And essentially, that's your concept, your self-concept. Most people's self-concepts are given or informed by their experiences of the past. Many people take their past and recall it into the present. And so just because it happened in the past, we don't leave it in the past. We recall it to the present. It informs who we are today and who we're likely to have, or the experience that we're likely to have tomorrow. And thus, you are creating your reality. Or in other words, choosing to perpetuate the story that you're currently in. Now, with that said, it is possible to make a quantum jump to a different timeline if you can give up the story of the past. Some people can. Some people don't have an attachment to the past, or very little attachment to the past. You see, in any given moment, you could be and are born brand new. It's only the baggage or the conceptions of the past that we recall and bring into the present and perpetuate into the future. If we could give up our old story and generate a new story, then we will unfold in a new reality based on that new story. This is why, personally, my work with self-concept, self-identity, the aligned self, the subpersonalities, is so critical in creating a new future. Because if you have any energetic ties to your story of the past, your mind keeps going back there, you keep living from the past, then it's incumbent upon you to alchemize that experience and turn it into gold, to create a finer and more beautiful expression of the mucky-muck situation that you found yourself in the past, that you've used and have used to define yourself to this day. So if part of you is still connected to the energy of the past, then part of your path is to heal that first. And in healing that, you can actually jump a timeline, because through that healing, you're going to shift that core belief about who you are and what it means about you. As I said yesterday, potentially, we can shift timelines 10, 20 times a day, every hour, just by making different decisions. But we tend to acquiesce, we tend to lean into our old decisions again and again. We have the same beliefs, the same stories, the same thoughts from day to day. So like I said earlier, and I'll revisit this, if you have an infinite number of possibilities, so if you're kind and you're nice in this timeline, you could be a dastardly evil person in another timeline and create different results, basically the antithesis of this life. So again, let's consider that there is an infinite number of possibilities, an infinite number of probable futures, probable selves that you could step into. Why do you pick the ones you do? Well, through your beliefs, your core perceptions, you're going to limit the exponential probable futures down to a few. So let's just throw some numbers out so our brain has an easier time of managing this information. Because when we're talking from the concept of infinity and unlimited number of lifelines and multiple, our brains actually reach the capacity of their understanding because we don't have a reference for infinity. So let's talk a million possibilities, a million possibilities. But given your core beliefs, given the variations of potentially beliefs that you could carry and still maintain a relative semblance of your self-concept, you're going to limit that million down to about a dozen potential probable futures. Maybe more, maybe less. Within you, you do have your ideal self, but you don't necessarily know exactly what that looks like or how it would be expressed out in the world. But there is, let's just, for sake of argument or sake of conversation, an ideal expression of who you could be or who you are. Let's say it's the person that you were meant to be or wanted to be when you incarnated here from a spiritual aspect. But given your life experience, given the circumstances, given the lessons that you took on, and some of the decisions that you made about who you were in response to those experiences, you've created the life that you currently have. And there is a desire to actually merge with that idealized self, the idealized expression of who you could be. All it would take to shift to that new timeline is just shifting or changing, upgrading one or two core beliefs, maybe three, but certainly no more than three. Shifting these core beliefs would allow you to tell and live a new story, a new expression. I think this would be a good time for me to tell you a story from my life of when I shifted a timeline, when I shifted to a new reality. So the date was January 15th, 1997. It was a Wednesday. I was 37 years old and I was a driver for FedEx. The route that I was on was in a resort town in northern Michigan. There had been a cold streak in the mid to high 20s most of the week, below freezing, below 0 centigrade. On this particular day, the sun had come out, the clouds had parted, and the temperature had risen to about 34, 35 degrees. Now, if you're not familiar with snow and ice, it freezes. Water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. At 34, 35, it's relatively warm. And when you've been in the 20s, and then suddenly it's now sunny and in the 30s, it feels like springtime. It feels like you could run around without your coat. But as beautiful as it was, about 11 o'clock, I suddenly got the sensation, the feeling of dread. And I knew that today I was going to buy it. Now, I've been psychic for a long time. It was an intuitive hit, an intuitive knowing. Something was going to happen. I was going to be in an accident. I just knew I was going to be in an accident, and I was going to die. Well, I had been reading the Seth material, some channeled work of Jane Roberts. And in the Seth material, it talked about probable realities, probable futures, and that we are living just one of many probable possibilities. Now, I also knew that one of the things that brings us circumstances and experiences is not just hard beliefs, but also those beliefs that we have of things possibly happening. It's a probability. It could happen. We have these beliefs, like that could happen to me. There could be a tornado, there could be a hurricane. And so just that possibility, that probability, may include you in other people's paths, other people's circumstances, other people's intentions. We travel in the community of souls. Now, I'm thinking all this through as I drive around town, and at every intersection, I'm like looking left and right and wondering, is this it? Is this it? And I make the decision, like, I'm not going to live in fear. I need to shift this. I'm going to shift the timeline. I'm going to shift the circumstances. I'm going to create a new probable reality. So I got to wondering, what belief was I holding that would make it possible for an accident to happen, something tragic to happen to me? Well, I had this belief that if you drive a number of miles, kind of like an insurance adjuster, that if you drive X number of miles, the probability of you having an accident goes up. The more miles you drive, the probability of having an accident goes up. It increases. But interestingly enough, just the week before, my wingman, Claire McNally, the guy that I worked with on a regular basis, and that's his real name because he deserves kudos for this, he had a safe driving record. He never, ever had an accident. And I asked him, never, ever, not even in your person? He said, no, never. I just don't believe in having an accident. I take precautions beforehand to avoid that. And I thought, isn't that interesting? I have this belief that it's probable or possible for me to have an accident. From Claire's perspective, it was never, ever possible. It just wasn't on his radar, just wasn't part of his consideration. Not happening to me? No way. So as I'm driving around, I start adopting a new story. And in my mind's eye, I see the potential accident. I just have the feeling of it. It's kind of dark and gloomy in my mind, in the theater of my mind. And I take my left hand and I pull it aside, like I'm yanking the image and down into the left. And, I had been certified in NLP at this point, and this is part of your shifting your submodalities. And so I was taking this image and I was pushing it aside and down into the left. And when I did that, I was saying, I reject this reality. And I was vehement. I reject this reality. I can drive safely and securely every day of my life. I am no longer playing the game of statistical probability. I'm choosing my own reality. I drive safely and securely, and all those around me are protected. I understand, and this is, I knew that there was some event occurring, and I was wondering, how radically can I shift it, knowing that there was a certain amount of momentum there, and we were about to rendezvous in space and time somewhere. Didn't know when. And so since we were going to have some kind of experience, I created it that we would have the experience, but everyone would walk away. Everyone would walk away safe and secure. We would definitely have something to remember, but no one would be hurt. Everyone would be safe and secure. I said that again and again. I took the image and I pushed it aside. I reject that possibility, and I brought in the reality that I wanted. So I acknowledged the old story, the critical belief, and I implanted a new belief, a new possibility, a new story. And I kept telling that new story over and over and over again. So from about 11:30 to 1 o'clock, I told this story again and again until it felt like I did not need to tell it anymore, that it had shifted. Suddenly the fear that I had, the dread that I had, was gone. And frankly, I forgot about the whole event, the whole scenario. Went on throughout my day, continued to deliver, had lunch, and about 5 o'clock, I called into dispatch and I cleared myself for the day. Where I was working was about 80 miles away from the station where we called home, or home base. Now, on January 15th, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it starts to get dark. The sun starts going down, and because the sun's no longer out, the temperature starts to drop. I didn't really think about that, but it started getting colder. And as I made my way to the expressway, I noticed that it started to drizzle a little bit of rain, moisture. The temperature had dropped back down to freezing. And it was when I noticed on the windshield, I'd gotten myself on the highway, on the expressway, and I noticed on the outer edges of my windshield, it was beginning to freeze. And no sooner did I realize it was freezing, I felt the rear wheels just kind of give away. And I let up off the gas because I realized that it was a sheet of ice on the road. It was only a moment later I saw across the median on the other side, traveling in the other direction, was a red Grand Prix, Pontiac Grand Prix, that left the road and was plowing through the median. The snow heading right for my door. In my mind, I'm like, what? What? I thought I fixed this. No, this is not happening. I was so vehemently against this. Like, no, I wasn't taking part of this. And it was when I said no the second time, the car that was coming towards me slowed down just a little bit. I mean, it was plowing through the snow. The snow was going in every direction. And it slowed down just for a little bit. Had the sensation of it slowing down just for a little bit. And then it sped back up. And I realized it was going to miss me. And I looked in my rear view, and it came up on the highway, did a 360-degree spin, and then went backwards into the median. Cars all around. Never hit a single car. And as I continued to kind of watch in my rearview mirror, they were piling out of the car, and everyone seemed to be okay. I didn't stop because, frankly, by this time I'm well down the road, and it's a sheet of ice. So I'm convinced that when I had that feeling of dread earlier, no doubt there was a timeline where that car was going to hit me directly. And given the speed we were going, we weren't going to survive. And I wonder if my higher self had not, kind of set the situation up just so I could put into practice shifting a timeline, of taking control of my timeline. Now, I hope this story conveys to you because in my mind, it's a complete movie. I see it all over again. But the key component there, what I shifted was that core belief that would make that experience possible. Once I shifted that, once I rejected that and created a new story, a new possibility to live into, I had the feeling of when it was complete, when it was shifted, when it was done. Now, one thing that's important to point out is when I identified that belief, I acknowledged that it was there. I didn't reject it. I didn't just push it aside wholly. I did accept it and acknowledge that it was there. Then I could reject it. I used to have this story that if I drive enough miles, sooner or later I'm going to have an accident. Now, in my mind, as long as I had a dinky-do or little accident, that was satisfying that probability. And it's no wonder that I had a series of little dinky-do accidents, little fender scrapes and bumps in here, just stupid little accidents. But that conversation with Claire, are you sure you've never, ever had an accident? Never even close? No, nothing. It created the possibility that it was true. You could live without fear of an accident. Didn't have to be on the horizon. Didn't have to be around the corner. You could literally drive and be safe wherever you go. This is the end of part 2 of our conversation on multiple universes, multiple timelines, parallel timelines, probable selves. Join me in part 3 where we pick up the conversation and I continue to break down this whole manifesting or creating a different timeline and how you can initiate change in your life. So until next time, this is your friend and host Daniel Day Novi urging you to follow your bliss. Live your life from inner signals. Be inner directed as you engage in the epic adventure.